Thank you. Well, welcome to our final session panel, Forum, Science and Politics. How do they mix? And the chair of the panel today, we're very happy to have Genevieve Jacobs from CCC ABC Canberra, well known in her field, a gifted communicator with special interests in politics, current affair, history, the arts and the environment. Welcome, Jenny.
Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. Hello. Pardon us for being a little late in beginning this. The business of the House has kept 3 out of 4 of the people on the panel, just slightly late arrivals. I'm Genevieve Jacobs from CCC. I present the morning's program where, in fact, just today, in the middle of the morning, we've been discussing science and the ABC even. So it does happen that out in the wider world, away from specialist discussions, people get chatty about science. So welcome to an agile and innovative panel. I'm sorry, I couldn't help myself. It's a good place to begin exploring the connection between science and politics. On the panel with me are the Assistant Minister for Science, the Honourable Mrs Karen Andrews, who is the member for McPherson. She's been a strong advocate for the Australian scientific community and was co-founder of the Friends of Science group here in the Federal Parliament. With a background in engineering, industrial relations and small business, she's very keen to encourage maths and science in schools and to promote the STEM professions. Next to her, Professor Aidan Byrne, Chief Executive Officer of the Australian Research Council, previously Dean of Science and Director of the College of Physical and Mathematical Sciences at the ANU. He has substantial industry knowledge and expertise. His research interests include the use of gamma rays as probes to determine the structure of heavy nuclei and the atomic level structure of materials. I'm sure that'll be fabulously useful this afternoon. Dr. Aidan Bandt is the first Green MP to take a seat in the House of Representatives in a general election as the member for Melbourne. His portfolio includes industry, energy, science and research, among other responsibilities, with a special focus on climate change and energy, and his background is as a public interest lawyer. On the end, taking up the rear in every regard, Richard Marles, MP, co-chairs the Parliamentary Friends of Science and is Shadow Minister for Immigration and Border Protection. He's the member for Corio, and his background is as a lawyer, working with the Transport Workers Union and as Assistant Secretary of the ACTU. And among a number of other parliamentary roles, he has been Parliamentary Secretary for Innovation and Industry. Now, how this is going to work is we'll begin with a discussion with questions from me, but then I'll turn it over to you. And I often say in these discussions that I have great faith in a Canberra audience. Now, you're not all Canberrans, I'm sorry for you in that regard, but I've got great faith nevertheless in your capacity to ask smart, able, concise questions. So when that time comes, put your hand up and catch my attention and direct your question to whichever of the panel you think is appropriate, or indeed to the panel as a whole. If you haven't done so already, please do turn your phones off so that you're not summoned in the middle of it all. But Aidan Byrne, let me start with you as the scientist on the panel. Late last year, the government announced $1.1 billion for the National Science and Innovation Agenda. Are you now persuaded that this current crop of politicians is listening to the needs of science?
Look, I think so. This is, for a person sitting in my position, which is the meat in the sandwich in some ways between the science and the politics of it, I think this has been quite an extraordinary period, and lots of discussions going on, lots of activities going on in the ARC ourselves. We've got 2 initiatives that we're prosecuting in this regard, and I think they're both very exciting about connecting what is a very, very high quality and high class research system that we have in this country, so that the benefits of that system get distributed more broadly. And those conversations that have happened over the last little while have been particularly exciting, I think.
So my sense there is that you're saying this is directed towards things that are critically important for us as a nation. Is that fair?
Oh, absolutely. And again, you know, I'm betraying my background. I do think that research is crucially important. There are limited occasions where activities can really make a substantial difference to our state of being as a whole. Research, I think, underpins a lot of that. We've got an opportunity now to really seize on that and to use it to its fullest.
Mm-hmm. Karen Andrews, Aidan Byrne seems to sense a sea change. Where is the emphasis for this government? Are you driven by results-oriented funding for major projects, or what does the line lie?
Well, certainly results are going to be one of the things that we will be seriously focusing on, and in that context, part of the National Innovation and Science Agenda is certainly focused on what we can do to deliver some serious outcomes in innovation and in science. One of the things that I find very encouraging out of the agenda is that there is a very strong emphasis on science. Science has picked up in dollar terms more than half of the $1.1 billion. I can be a bit more creative and get a lot more that is actually in science, but we can go with about $550 million for that. But I think it's the opportunity that it opens which is very important to us, and the focus on industry research collaboration and the opportunities for industry to engage in science and to commercialise the research.
And I'm interested in that note of commercialisation. We'll talk more about that in a moment. But who do you talk to about setting those priorities? What is the line of communication that helps you decide where your priorities should lie?
Well, there was very broad a consultation about many of the components that were in the innovation and science agenda. And if I start with STEM, and given time I might just stay with STEM at the moment, a lot of work has been done over many years in STEM, so science, technology, engineering and maths. The former chief scientist, Ian Chubb, wrote a report. I was involved in travelling around the country with Ian Chubb, talking to a wide range of people. So certainly some teachers, we talked to researchers, we talked to industry representatives, we talked to innovators about how to encourage more people to take up study in the STEM disciplines. So that was a very wide-ranging piece of consultation. There will be a full government response to that in time as well. So we've demonstrated consultation there. In terms of industry innovation funds, a lot of work has been done for that, again, over many years as to how we can kickstart innovation and make sure that we are expending money in the right areas. The fund that's being set up with the CSIRO is certainly a good step forward in terms of co-investment and making sure that the links between industry and the researchers are well-founded. And a lot of consultation went into various proposals as to how we could engage more fully with industry.
Richard Marles, you've heard Karen discuss their commercialisation. She mentioned innovation and industry. I wonder whether you think it's important to also fund pure research and to trust that that will be a vector for future developments whose value we can't see right now.
Of course, and the debate between the funding of pure research versus applied science, which can be commercialised, is a debate that's gone on for a long time. It's kind of an important tension to be constantly teasing out. I think funding for pure research over the journey in Australia is something that has been done. I mean, we would make our criticism of the government in terms of how that has been funded over the last 3 years, but in a sense trying to keep it out of the partisan space. I think the real challenge for us as a country, though, is not so much the tension in that debate as it is in some of the points that Karen was making. Where we do badly as a country, and we have over a very long period of time, is the collaboration between the private sector and public research. It is in that interface that we rank just about the lowest in the OECD. Now, I guess one of the things that has been pleasing in recent times is that stat is starting to be talked about publicly. It's been around for a long time, and it was hard to find an audience for that stat, I've got to say, in the public discourse for a long time. It is at least now being heard, but what we then do about it, there is a lot to be done there, and I don't feel like it's been completely nailed yet, and yet I think it is absolutely fundamental to our future economy. It is right up there as one of the most significant pieces of microeconomic reform, really, that we have as a country to make sure we get that right.
Aidan, Byrne, I'll just stick for a moment with that tension between pure and applied research, because I want to know how hard a line that is to argue for you. Now, it's clear if you've got something that leads to a very clear objective and outcome with benefits, to argue for the research funding for that is, I would imagine, relatively straightforward, but much harder to say, let me keep thinking about this and see where we end up.
So this is this tension between, what is seen as basic research and applied directed research. I actually think I've got a broader picture than that, because just about any research that you can think of, if it's done at the right level, there will be applications, and I'm looking at Dan Shattuck up there, not to single you out. I'm trying to get another cheer for the audience about gravity waves, for instance, because as Alan Finkel mentioned at lunch, and I completely concur with him, as a physicist, that was the most important thing that happened in a century. And yet, if you think about what was done in that measurement, where Australian scientists contributed to that, It was the most sensitive measurement ever made. And of course, that was to test a very fundamental theory about the very primal building blocks of nature, so basic science at its core. Yet the techniques and the technology evolved through that have enormously broad applications that we haven't even sampled yet. And people in Australia are starting to do that. So this notion that it is either pure with no benefit or directed, not connected to pure, I think is a bit of a fallacy. But I think the comments that were made earlier, we do need to do better as a country to enable that transition to occur.
You've got to be able to argue your case too. You've got to be able to communicate that effectively, to say we're looking at a very abstract notion here, but we've every reason to believe that there will be multiple applications.
So researchers do have to get better at working at various planes. I mean, it's very easy to convince your own audience, your own constituency about why the research that you're doing is important, but increasingly so you've got to get much better at the short pitch to tell other people why what you're doing is important in the broader context. Yep.
Adam, whose role is it in this country to fund research? What's the balance between government and the private sector?
I think government plays a leading role. I think government plays a leading role, especially in curiosity-driven research. I'd sort of prefer to call it that. Happy with the term pure research, but I think I just want to defend curiosity-driven research for a moment, because I think if government doesn't carve out the space for that, then I don't know who will. And I think that it's critical that one of the roles that government can play is to establish long-term targets. We've just this week set a goal for 2% of GDP to be spent on defence, and that sort of happened without a blink of an eyelid or anyone saying that's necessarily a bad thing. Why don't we set a goal for 3% of public and private, 3% of GDP coming from the public and private sector by 2020 for Australia to spend on science and research? And the data suggests we're lagging behind that. Other countries, including our trading partners, have set those goals, and I think if we set those goals and potentially legislate them and get public acceptance for them in the way that we're getting public acceptance for other spending goals, then I think a lot of things flow from that, including security for curiosity-driven research.
So how then, I like this term curiosity-driven research, I think that's an excellent description. How then do we ensure that priority for long-term thinking, for sort of seeding enough funding to allow science to get on with the job without worrying about whether the cash will run out before those long-term goals are realised?
Look, I think that's one of the critical questions, in part not just because of what it means for the project, but because of what it means for the people involved in the project. I mean, if you're starting out as an early or mid-career researcher and you're looking at a series of short-term contracts and insecure funding, and meanwhile someone else in the US or the UK is prepared to offer you a 3 or a 5 year contract and much more flexibility, I'm not surprised that a lot of people choose to pick up and go overseas. I think science and innovation already has a pretty firm place in the Australian psyche. I think there's enormous public support for it, and I think there's an error that many of us make. If only the politicians had more facts and had more information, they'd make a better decision. No. That's an unscientific way of thinking about how politicians make decisions. You've just sat in on Question Time, you should see that, you should understand that. And I think the question is, how do we get science...
That's actually quite harsh.
Well, how do we get science to have as much political clout as, say, the car industry used to, or as, say, other sections of the economy used to, because it's so important and it's that essential to our future. We need to get to the point where no politician wants to touch the science budget in the same way that no politician would want to touch the defence budget.
So how do we do that?
Well, yeah, how do we do that? But Karen Andrews, I want to actually just talk to you about public-private funding, which you raised a moment ago. Do we have a tax incentive for research and development to encourage private funding for science research?
Well, the R&D tax incentive is going to be reviewed, and I understand that it has been reviewed before. I think there's obviously some work that we need to be doing with how that incentive actually operates so that it is an incentive. I've already raised a number of concerns with any tinkering with such an incentive, and that is I would be very concerned about anything happening to the R&D tax incentive that encourages big business to conduct their research overseas rather than in Australia. So as we look at potential changes, we have to be very mindful of the unintended consequences of it, because the private sector, big business here, does already support scientific research. I would like them to do more. So the last thing I want to do is put anything in place that's going to discourage them from putting that in. I think we've also got to look at making sure that the R&D tax incentive drives research and development here in Australia, so that where money is being spent, it stays here. It's not going offshore in the first instance anyway. There's certainly a lot of work to be done. We've got to look at how we encourage our small and particularly our medium enterprises to engage with researchers to conduct work that they do. And I understand that's more at the applied end than at the fundamental research area, but we have to look at how we engage our medium enterprises, because that's where maximum benefit can be had in terms of enterprise and innovation into the future. And can I make the point with innovation that I've been very keen to make sure that people understand that innovation is not just the next app that can be produced. A lot of the work that the scientific community does already is very innovative, and we have to make sure that that is actually recognised and that we capitalise on that and commercialise that innovation.
Aidan, Byrne, we've been talking about cash, cold hard cash, in one guise or another for the last few minutes. Let's talk about matters not directly related to ongoing science, but to the culture of science. What's important in fostering a culture where you invest in people, in gender, for example, so that more women have long-term careers, in education before the tertiary level, so that we've got a rich, diverse science community, and also one that's less vulnerable to the overseas brain drain?
So again, culture and people are the important building blocks of a scientific system. I mean, the infrastructure is crucially important too, so you can't separate the two. But it is the people is the primary resource. And again, I think at the moment when you talk about people going overseas, that's actually an important component. Most of the people I imagine in this room have spent extended periods overseas, and that's a very positive and healthy characteristic of our Australian system, interestingly. Our people here are highly connected to an international research environment and experience, as we should. We are a very small country, and unless our people are making those connections in a very significant way, we will not get the full advantage. So again, it comes back to people all the time. And the culture within our institutions is really important. We are very lucky in this country, as I've said earlier, to have a really high quality research system and excellent people that can actually go out into the world and be recognised as contributors to the global scientific research conversation. We do need to try and preserve that across all of the domains. There are areas where we need to improve the connection with business, absolutely have to do that. But again, we also have to think about the context. The Australian business community is not the same as that in Germany or in the UK or in the US. We have a different environment. We have to find a solution that is not somebody else's solution. It's got to take the people that we have here and the environment that we have here. And that's not easy. It's complicated, because if you do something in one domain, you put stress on it in the other. And it's a complicated picture. And I think anyone who pretends, that one initiative, one R&D tax concession change is going to solve the whole picture, I think they are making a mistake, because it is a very complicated picture, and if you don't understand the people in the system and the context, you'll get it wrong.
Adam, Bandt, I think to ensure that rich, diverse culture that I mentioned a moment ago, we need to have lots and lots of people coming into science in the first place. How well do you think the science discussion embraces all of us? Has science been successful in getting everyone interested?
I think it falls down a bit. It's the end of primary school and high school, and I think that I applaud the steps that various governments, successive governments, have taken to make sure that some of those primary school programs in particular continue, because I think kids, we all know it, like they're sponges and they just love it. They suck up science, but I'm in some ways a bit of a walking advertisement for the failure of science education, because if you asked me what I was going to be when I was at school, it was probably something to do with maths or something to do with rocks. And then when I got to uni, I asked around and I said, what should I study? I don't know what I want to do. And everyone advised me, if you want a good generalist degree, do law. And so I did law. And I think it's like, that point when you're at the end of high school, what is it How does someone say to you, no, look, a good generalist degree is a science degree, and that, I think, that's a crucial step that we're missing at the moment.
And I think certainly we're seeing some concern over falling standards. I know in New South Wales universities, for example, there's a move on to mandate a higher standard of maths and science for people going into basic science degrees because the levels are not good enough to get people through those degrees.
Yeah, open to that, and also what do we do to support teachers at, the number of teachers teaching maths with specialist qualifications in maths is just declining at a shocking rate. We need to fix that.
Richard, speaking of diversity and having chaired a number of these discussions at Parliament with crowds of varying size, asking sometimes very variable questions, do we possibly need more scientists in Parliament?
I certainly think we need more scientists in Parliament. I have a science degree. Karen does. There are a couple of us around, but not many. This is not a partisan comment. In fact, it's a very bipartisan comment. I think the science literacy of the Parliament is hopeless, and it does go to the quality of, it goes to the question actually that Adam raised before, which is how do we make science something which just can't be touched when you're getting into the pointy end of budgetary discussions? And I think the fact that we don't have a kind of critical mass of scientists in the building has obviously got to play a role in that. But I think it goes to a bigger question, and that is the science culture in the country. We obviously do have a flourishing scientific community, and you all are testament to that. I don't think, though, as a community, we appreciate science anywhere near enough. I don't think we celebrate it in this country in the way we should, and I think sometimes we like to say that because we feel that in a forum like this we should, but I don't think it helps us to kind of perpetuate that any longer. The reality is we need to dramatically elevate the place of science within the public, within public discourse. That's going to help improve its place in this building so that people see that it matters. That's what's going to see more kids want to study science at school and at university. And we absolutely need to do it because we are finding our regional neighbours are moving ahead in this regard, and we are going to get left behind. So in a sense, the question, for me at the heart of this is how do you promote science in a much bigger way? And one of the things that occurs to me in that regard is that there's a lot of big science going on that we don't talk about. When I chose to pursue science at school and then at university, I was kind of, if you look at the graphs, I was making those decisions in the early 80s, which was at about the peak at which people were studying science. In some respects, I think we were all the children of Apollo. We grew up with those stories and they were front page news. You have a president of the United States declaring that it is a national ambition to put somebody on the moon. This is a scientific endeavour and it runs every day. How many people now know about the Square Kilometre Array telescope, which is going to completely transform our understanding of the universe and is happening right here? How many people know about the Giant Magellan Telescope, which is something that Australia has a 10% stake in, which as a group of new wave or new generation optical telescopes is going to, our sense of whether we're alone in the universe, all those questions are going to be answered. None of that makes it into the news, and I think that is at the heart of it. And somehow, that's not, in part that's politicians' fault. In part, it is the scientific community's fault. In part, it is the media's fault. But we actually need to resolve that.
I think, in that respect, scientists, and I've been saying this for a while, scientists need to get political, and not political in the sense of you've got to vote for a particular party, although of course you should, but but in the sense that if you look back at the big campaigns that have been, one of the things that's clear about this building and that I hope that you've got a sense of over the last little while is that there are people who patrol the corridors pushing their barrow. And when it comes budget time in particular, unless we've convinced the Australian population to grow the pie, which is, I think, part of the thing that we've got to do when it comes to science, then there's going to be a fight over the resources that are left. And so in that fight, the loudest and most organised voices often win. And if you look back at some of the big battles over things like the mining tax, for example, where the mining industry got together and ran a sophisticated PR campaign, or pokies, where the pokies industries, got their ads on TV and had people running campaigns. What's the science equivalent of that? Who is there to tell the science story? And I know a lot of people you just want to be doing your research and so on, and I applaud that. And sometimes it's not necessarily, as I say, about working out how to give people more information or distill your work better. It's about how do you jump into the political fray in a way that's going to change the minds of the decision makers in this building.
It's really important.
And I think actually interestingly, our discussion this morning was with Rod Lambert, who I know has been with you as part of Science Meets Parliament, and we were chatting on the radio about the Catalyst program last week and whether science has a responsibility to talk to so-called alternative science and alternative theories. And of course, one of the important points there is that the general public doesn't necessarily know the difference unless people step in and sharpen their communication skills and agitate for themselves. For each of the politicians, now have you all been matched up with a scientist? Have you all had a meeting with a scientist as part of this? Yes.
I had 4, which I'm very excited about.
Well,
2 here.
What did you learn in that process, Karen?
I learned lots of things. We could have talked for much more than half an hour. We actually spent a lot of the discussion talking about how we engage young people. We talked about the drop-off in interest in science at around the end of the primary years going into the secondary years. To be honest, I think most of the discussion was actually about STEM and how we can go out and deal with the known problem areas. Now, I think Adam's actually raised a couple of points that I think are interesting. So can I sort of divert
you can divert
question?
for a moment, yes.
One of the things that Adam said, and I'm trying to get this right, and it's not a criticism, Adam, so
right.
It was when you were encouraged going into university that law would be a good base degree. I would really like to change that thinking, because I think science is a good base degree, engineering is a good base degree. And with respect to a lot of people with law degrees, there are many who are not working as lawyers and will never work as lawyers. But employers see that a law degree provides you with valuable skills for a workplace. I would argue that science and engineering teach you valuable skills for a workplace as well. Problem solving, process analysis, obviously scientific rigour. And we've got to work in some key areas. One of those is with employers, so that they understand that people with science and engineering degrees don't have to be employed in a lab or on a shop floor, that they can provide a lot of support in a whole range of jobs throughout the private sector and also the public sector. What we don't have really for science in particular is the pull factors coming through, and we certainly need to educate people. We need to communicate, but a key part of the communication is to make sure that we are hitting the right entry points for the people that we want to influence. Now, I take on board that politicians are certainly decision makers, but we need a groundswell of support from the community to support engagement in science, and that's where I think we need to focus our efforts, as well as making sure that politicians, particularly around budget time, understand the dollar considerations.
Richard Marles, who did you meet and what did you learn?
Well, I had 3 scientists come and speak to me, so and I can see, I hope they're all here, but Coast, who's just put his hand up, so Coast is working for CSIRO he's developing sensors which are helping the productivity of crops and particularly cotton. What I think is great about Coast's story is that Coast is from Nigeria, went to university in Nigeria, did his PhD at Reading University, but did a lot of his research work in the Philippines. And when I asked why have you ended up in Narrabri working for the CSIRO, the answer was the reputation of the CSIRO, which says something, and we are much the better, and Coast's got his permanent residency, so as a country we are much the better for Coast being here and giving us his skills, but it says something about the fact that we do have a fantastic science community which has the power to attract people. So that was the first one. Edward is here also. Edward is from Nottingham, well actually from Jersey, but from Nottingham University, so we've got another import, and again doing great work in the nuclear engineering department of UNSW, which I'm told is the only one that there is in the country in terms of universities. But I think what came for me out of that conversation was, the nuclear industry is one which is highly political, but where I think the science literacy of those politicians who engage in the debate is very minimal, and we would do much better as a cohort if we actually understood the science of the nuclear industry, of nuclear power much better, and I think Edward felt that as well in his comments to me. And the final person was Jodie is here. So Jodie is a mathematician, dear to my heart, because my degree was in pure maths. Jodie is a PhD in maths education, though. But the point that Jodie made, which goes to a lot of what we've been talking about, that I thought was very telling, is I hope I do this justice, Jodie. It's a sense of reverse pride that there is around maths. In other words, no one, this is Jodie's words, no one would walk around wearing a badge saying they can't read or they can't write. But the number of people who are prepared to walk around saying, you know, they're no good at maths, and to project that in respect of children at school, I mean, Jodie's absolutely right. And I've seen that with my own kids' education, and you know, what hope have we got when there are teachers saying it's kind of okay to own the fact that you're no good at maths at such a young age, when in fact people have an enormous potential to become, I mean, people can do it. And so that's kind of what I took away from that, but it was a really good session with all three.
Yeah, I'm going to throw the floor open in a moment, so be ready with your hands and questions. But Adam Bandt, what did you learn?
Just briefly, great chat last night at the dinner about electric buses. I mean, there's obviously a number of barriers to people taking up electric cars, even though people are really interested. There's availability, cost and the like. Infrastructure is a big one. One of the is people, you know, range anxiety. What happens if my car runs out? Where am I going to recharge? It was sort of an aha moment for me yesterday that actually that problem isn't there for buses, because they follow a defined route all the time, and so you know how far they've got to go, and so it actually then becomes a logistical and engineering challenge, which could ultimately be quite simply solved, about how you charge batteries and refit them at a particular time, and like they should all work according to a fairly regular timetable. So it was, you know, the challenges, there are other challenges about how do you, like there's the size and the weight of the batteries, and buses being now having to have low floor for universal access. But it was a really great moment, thinking what, you know, one of the things that stood in the way of the uptake of electrified vehicles there just isn't there for buses. So I've got a date to come and see the layout of them at Swinburne Uni, so I'm looking forward to that.
That sounds great. Okay, so questions from the floor. Yes, to you first. Oh, we've got a microphone for you. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. My question is for Aidan. You described the great mobility of young Australian academics as a strength of the Australian research system, but also that if you don't understand the people in the system, you're going to get it wrong. So given the systemic issues that have been identified with gender inequity in the academic system in Australia, who is our research system built for?
That's a really
That's a
tough
fantastically
question.
good question.
Yes. Well done. So actually, I'm going to be provocative then, since you were there. I could argue at the moment our research system in Australia is built for the researchers, and it's a product. I am being provocative here, so don't quote me on this. Well, yes, it's the existing researchers in the system, which is largely male, and they've constructed a system which suits you guys pretty well, and you've done very well, because again, as a research system, the Australian research system is very strong. So congratulations all of you. You've constructed a really good research system suitable for middle-class males like me, or old males like me. But we are changing, and we are doing things to make it change. So the initiatives of the government are about trying to make it change, making it looking more outward-looking and not just more self-reflexive. Now, we, the ARC, are in part to blame for that with our focus on quality, and I don't want to reconcile or back away from that in any way. But where we are going now is to give more credence, more rewards, more initiatives for outward-looking behaviour. So that's a virtue that we're trying to instill in the system. And I think we heard, if no other theme came across in the last couple of days, is how important the gender issue is. And that conversation we didn't have when I was in your seat when I first came in this. So the system is moving, not as fast as I would like, But it is moving and is changing. And again, within the ARC, as some options as a vehicle for change, we're trying to do our best too.
I might just add a comment that gender equity unlocks intellectual capital, and that has to be important. Next question just here.
This morning I had a conversation with an unnamed politician, Wyatt Roy, who likened academics and to some extent universities as rats in a maze, very smart rats in a maze, but a maze nevertheless. And the argument was that the government is the keeper of the maze and they can rearrange the maze and academics will find a way through it. I think to focus in on one particular issue, I think there's a big problem with the industry-university engagement. And I think I've heard time and time again from industry that the problem is not the researchers in the universities not wanting to engage, but it's a problem with the universities, that they're just difficult to collaborate with, it's difficult to set things up. So my question is, how do we rearrange the maze to incentivise universities to want to go out and collaborate?
Karen, can I go to you first for your take on that?
Yes, well, I don't want to associate myself with those remarks because I don't think the universities are a maze and that researchers are rats trying to find their way around at all. But I can understand how that thought has been put together, I suppose. Look, industry researcher collaboration is extraordinarily difficult, and there's been a fair bit of debate already, and there probably will be more about the metrics. And it's been put to me that really we need to look at engagement as a method of determining whether or not there is appropriate engagement between industry and researchers. Now, it depends on how that is actually going to be set up because, quite frankly, all of us could do 10 meetings a day and it could have no outcome. So if we're just ticking a box to say, OK, well, I've spoken to X number of businesses, then it won't actually be a very good output measure. So I think we have to be very careful about how we set up how we're going to measure engagement in the first place, and that's going to drive I guess the change that we need. It's easier for big businesses to engage with universities because they have more money to start with. They invariably have more resources to allocate to that level of engagement. Our problem areas are at the small and the medium ends. Now, how do we get a small business to engage? It is near on impossible for a small business, and particularly a micro business, to engage with researchers to get them to undertake work. They don't have necessarily the finances to be able to do it. They don't have the resources to allocate to actually look at where they should be getting the research done. So I think that the prime area is looking at medium enterprises and how we get medium enterprises to engage. Part of that, I think, is the communication model, that many of the medium enterprises in Australia are not aware of where there have been successful interactions with universities and with other like businesses. So communication is certainly going to be a key part of it. One of the biggest obstacles, though, is the contractual relationship, the intellectual property. And we have to look at how we're going to resolve that issue. I understand that universities want to protect their intellectual property, but it's going to be near on impossible to find medium or large businesses that are prepared to sign away their IP rights for something that they have paid a researcher to develop. So I think the focus should be how we engage with medium enterprises and get them involved, and then how we deal with the IP issues.
OK, Aidan, you wanted to...
Well, again, I think you've probably explained it quite beautifully. It's about what the drivers are in the system. I think at the moment in the Australian system, the drivers are very much focused on the academic dimension to almost the exclusion of everything else. So every institution in the country responds to that. The NISA agenda very much talked about the evaluation of engagement and impact. The ARC has been charged to do that. That will change the drivers and that will shift the system.
Okay. Okay. Yes, Richard. Yes.
So it's a really good question. I think it's the one that we need to solve, and you know, I don't have all the answers. I think both of those answers are good though, because you know, intellectual property and how you handle that is certainly really key. Getting the incentives right for universities is key. I suppose I'd add two other things. One is financing of early stage commercialisation. We need to get our head around better, and both the political parties are working on that and have policies in that arena, so that's a good thing. But there are examples out there, for example, Israel, where we can learn a lot. And I guess at a domestic level, an example which I'd offer up is Deakin University, which is in part in my electorate. The Geelong Technology Precinct, which has a whole lot of quite small companies basing themselves on there, using PhDs and researchers from Deakin, developing new products, is a really good. That co-location is a really good example where jobs are being created and work's being done. So I do think some of our universities are getting their head around this.
Okay, forest of hands, it's fantastic. Yep, we'll go to you and just get the microphone along.
Thanks. I wanted to go back to this idea of STEM degrees as generalist degrees, because I think that's a fantastic idea, and I think it's something that this community could really get behind. I just want to ask your opinions on what our roles in supporting this should be as people working within universities, some of us, and whether that should be focused externally in terms of trying to convince, advertising effectively to employers and parents and schools about the value of these degrees, or whether our role should be more internal in making sure that our curriculum emphasizes to our students that we're teaching them communication skills and problem-solving skills that they can then go out and advertise those degrees for us.
Adam Bandt, I want to start with you. Like you, I began thinking that a law degree would kind of be a reasonable start to life. I'm not sure whether it has been or not, but it's a good question about science encompassing those communication and workplace skills, isn't it?
I think in part get them while they're young. I think that there's got to be that continued. There's been many. I'm not going to single out particular government cuts, but there's been many cuts over the years that I've opposed, and the ones that have got me the most strongly have been the ones that have been cuts to primary school programs and cuts to high school programs, because I think that's when people are making decisions, and that's when kids are making decisions about what they're into and influencing their parents. And so I would say there's a range of things that are needed, but one in particular is when people are making those decisions about what counts, like that, what counts as a generalist degree, that's a very important time to get in and say, no, here's where it works. Now, that then has to be backed up by a pile of people who are prepared to step in and say, yes, that's right, and so will employ you, or this will make you more employable. But I think that's the time to be focusing on.
Aidan, go.
So I'm going to answer your question specifically as a former Dean of Science, and I think you actually have to do more of the latter. But I think you'll also find that that's quite challenging. If you're sitting within a university trying to change the curriculum in a particular science discipline, there'll be lots of pressures not to add the extra stuff in. But if you can do that, and if you can do that effectively, your graduates will be the advertising that you need. Now, the problem with that process, it's slow. It'll take a generation to do it. But I think it's actually about getting in there, making sure that your curriculum is a modern, appropriate curriculum as the first step.
Can I just ask you, Aidan, whether you actually see that happening? Because it seems to me that the responsibility from universities is crucial at the heart of that question.
No, I do, and I think I see that at all levels, both in the undergraduate space, but also increasingly in the postgraduate and PhD space, is a broadening of ideas. And inclusions into what is seen as an appropriate curriculum. And the big strength of the generalist science degree is actually their capacity and their numeracy more than anything else, the ability to understand and synthesize data. Now, of course, what most science people are less proficient at is the reading and processing of written word, and that's where the law degree wins out. But if you had to pitch where society's going, it's the understanding of data that's going to win out. So, watch out, world.
Yeah, well, certainly in the media, we just love a really good science communicator. We yearn for really good science communicators. It is so important that we understand what you're doing and someone is able to communicate it. One last question. I think we'll go to you. You've had your hand up since the very beginning. So we'll just get the microphone through to you.
Hi. We've heard a lot over the last couple of days about increasing the number of STEM graduates and also about encouraging researchers to engage with industry. But I'm still left wondering how these two admirable goals are going to actually increase the amount of Australian industry that I can collaborate with and where STEM graduates can work in a significant way.
Okay.
Can I take on?
You can, and I'll go to Karen after that.
Sorry, I think it's as was explained. I mean, part of the trick here has got to be to build the mediums so that they have capacity, but it's also got to access more the smalls, and you do that in research parks, research networks, to build capacity. Now, the problem with that, I think we're starting off a very low base in this country, and it's going to take time to do it. And that's the big challenge that I think this country has. But it is about trying to get the conversations to happen more effectively, so to remove as many of the barriers as you can, so that your smalls can progress to mediums, your micros can progress to smalls, the smalls to mediums, and the mediums have sufficient capacity. And the biggest problem I think we have in this country is we have way too many smalls and not even enough mediums. So that's the challenge. But I think, as I say, removing barriers, making the dialogue go a lot more smoothly, removing IP issues is a step forward.
Karen Andrews?
Look, it's a very fair question to ask, and if I can give, it'll be a little bit of a lengthy question here. When I first started in this role, and I was given responsibility for STEM from an industry point of view, my question to the Department of Industry's chief economist was, well, assuming we are wildly successful and all these students take up science and maths subjects at the senior level, and we know that that's declining now, so there's a drop-off in science and maths subjects, where are all these people going to get jobs into the future? And he sort of came back and talked to me about some specific areas where those skills would be used. I think it was Aidan, you've touched on that. One is certainly data analysis going forward, that there is certainly going to be work with the huge amounts of data that we're amassing now. We'll get more coming through the SKA when it comes online as well. So there's going to be data analysis work that's needed into the future. There will also be coding, which was discussed at my meeting with the scientists this morning. So there will be coding jobs into the future, and they're probably where the key areas are going to be. Now, having said that, none of us have a crystal ball as to what the future is going to be. The predictions are that 75% of the jobs of the future will require science and maths skills. What we do know, given that, is that we have to take some action to correct that now. Otherwise, we will not have people with the skills to take up work in the areas of the future. Now, because we don't have a crystal ball, we can only assess what the likelihood of increases in technology are. And I think it would be fair to say that there will be an increase in use of technology into the future. So let's make sure that we are developing the skills in our younger people to take on those jobs wherever they may develop, whether it be in pure science or the tech areas or engineering.
Okay, and Adam?
I think we need a new Apollo project. I quit my job as a lawyer and started running in elections because of the science of climate change, and reading that, okay, we've actually only got a couple of decades to turn things around. And for a country like Australia that's built its economy on the basis of a series of copper lines out to coal mines, not because of evil intent, but that's just what people thought you needed to do, that's a massive change in a very short period of time. And then you look at countries like Germany, where they say all shoulders to the wheel, and they say let's combine advanced manufacturing and high-tech manufacturing with high levels of investment in science and a public commitment to science, and make it a foreign policy and energy security question, and let's have all shoulders to the wheel. And you look at the fact that they've managed to grow GDP while pollution's falling, so they're decoupling economic growth from pollution growth, and jobs are just going through the roof. To me, it's quite exciting. And so we're at the moment spending 2.2% of our GDP, public and private, on science, research and innovation. Many of our trading partners are up 3 to 4. If we set 3 as a goal, that's about $300 to $400 million a year cumulatively for the next few years just of government expenditure, and that would hopefully leverage private expenditure. That's how you create those additional jobs. So it comes back to this question about how do we grow the size of the pie, but my feeling is that people would be up for it if we sold it right. And that's, I guess, my continued challenge to the science community is let's work out how to sell it right.
And I think the Germans, of course, have a physicist in charge of the country, do they not? Yes? Chemist. I withdraw my earlier aspersion on the quality of your questions because you were not Canberrans. I think your questions were brilliant. You did that very well indeed. We've reached the end of our time, and I'd like to thank very much the Honourable Mrs. Karen Andrews, Professor Aidan Byrne, Dr. Adam Bandt, the Honourable Richard Marles, and you for asking some wonderful questions. Thank you very much indeed for your time.
Thanks.